In the quiet countryside of the Midwest, a long-abandoned farmhouse stood at the edge of a dense forest. Known as the Blackwell House, it was infamous among locals for its dark history and unsettling reputation. The house had been built in the early 1900s by the Blackwell family, who were well regarded in their community until a series of tragic events marred their legacy. The first of these tragedies occurred when Mr. Blackwell, the family patriarch, died under mysterious circumstances. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but whispers of foul play circulated. Shortly after Mr. Blackwell's death, Mrs. Blackwell began to exhibit erratic behavior. She was often seen wandering the grounds at night, talking to herself and behaving as though she were conversing with unseen visitors. One night, Mrs. Blackwell disappeared without a trace. The police searched the area extensively but found no evidence of her whereabouts. The Blackwell children, left orphaned and troubled, were taken in by relatives, and the farmhouse fell into disrepair. Years later, in the 1960s, a local family, the Millers, bought the property with plans to restore it. However, from the moment they moved in, they reported a series of disturbing incidents. Their young daughter, Lisa, began to have nightmares about a shadowy figure that she described as the lady in the house. She spoke of seeing this figure wandering the halls, calling out for someone. One particularly cold winter night, the Millers were awakened by a loud banging noise coming from the basement. Mr. Miller went downstairs to investigate, only to find the basement door wide open and a chilling draft that seemed to come from nowhere. The basement was filled with old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs, but nothing seemed out of place. He closed the door and returned to bed, but the noises continued, now accompanied by faint, sorrowful whispers. The disturbances worsened over the following weeks. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut, and the family's pets refused to enter certain rooms. The final straw came when Mrs. Miller discovered an old, dusty journal hidden behind a false wall in the attic. The journal belonged to Mrs. Blackwell and was filled with frantic entries about voices in the walls and the darkness that never leaves. One entry was particularly unsettling. It described an encounter with a presence that Mrs. Blackwell believed was responsible for her husband's death and her own unraveling sanity. The last entry ended abruptly with the words, "They are coming for me. I cannot stay." Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, the Millers contacted a local historian who uncovered more about the Blackwell family's tragic history. According to records, Mrs. Blackwell had been deeply involved in spiritualism and had conducted numerous seances in the house, hoping to contact her deceased husband. Many believed she had summoned something malevolent that never left the property. The Millers, now thoroughly unnerved, decided to move out, leaving the house vacant once more. The Blackwell house stood abandoned, its windows dark and foreboding, and its reputation as a place of lingering sorrow and unrest grew. The local lore continued to speak of eerie lights flickering in the windows at night and strange figures glimpsed through the cracks of the boarded-up doors. Today, the Blackwell house remains a ghostly reminder of its troubled past. Those brave enough to approach it often report feeling an oppressive atmosphere and hearing faint, sorrowful whispers carried on the wind. The legend of the Blackwell house endures as a chilling testament to the idea that sometimes the echoes of the past refuse to stay buried. Years after the Millers fled the Blackwell house, the property remained vacant, a chilling relic of its tragic past. The once grand farmhouse had deteriorated further, with its paint peeling and vines creeping up the walls like skeletal fingers. Local kids dared each other to approach the house, often hearing strange noises and seeing fleeting shadows that only fueled the house's reputation. In the late 1980s, a new owner, an ambitious real estate developer named Jonathan Carver, decided to purchase the Blackwell house with plans to restore it to its former glory. Carver was known for his work on historic properties and dismissed the local legends as mere superstitions. He was determined to revitalize the farmhouse, believing that a renovation would be a worthy challenge and a lucrative investment. As soon as Carver and his team began their work, the strange occurrences resumed. At first, it was small things. A cold draft despite the lack of open windows, tools misplaced, and strange noises at night. Carver, while initially skeptical, couldn't deny the growing sense of unease among his crew. One evening, as Carver worked late alone in the house, he discovered something unsettling in the basement. Among the dust-covered remnants, he found an old, ornate mirror that had been shoved into a corner. It was covered in a thick layer of grime, but Carver decided to clean it up and place it in the main hall. That night, Carver stayed at the house to oversee some late renovations. As he worked, he noticed the mirror seemed to reflect more than just the room. It seemed to distort the space around it, making the hallway appear longer and the shadows deeper. He felt a chill and heard soft whispers, though he dismissed them as the result of his fatigue. By the second week of renovations, things took a darker turn. Carver's workers started experiencing vivid nightmares. One worker, named Dave, claimed he saw a spectral figure of a woman in period clothing wandering the hallways, her face a twisted mask of sorrow. Another worker, Sarah, heard disembodied voices calling her name and felt a constant, invisible presence hovering over her shoulder. Carver, driven by both curiosity and skepticism, decided to spend the night in the house himself to uncover the truth. He set up cameras and audio recorders throughout the property, determined to capture any evidence of paranormal activity. That night, as Carver reviewed the footage, he noticed something disturbing. The cameras caught brief, fleeting images of shadowy figures moving through the rooms. One video showed the reflection in the mirror suddenly shifting, displaying a scene from the past. A Victorian-style room with Mrs. Blackwell's ghostly figure standing at a window, staring out with a look of utter despair. The audio recordings were even more unsettling. They captured muffled voices pleading for help, and one particularly disturbing clip contained a low, guttural growl followed by a chilling whisper, "She never left." As the days went by, the disturbances became more violent. Doors slammed shut on their own, and objects were thrown across rooms with no apparent cause. Carver's team became increasingly frightened, and some quit, unwilling to return to the house. Despite this, Carver pressed on, convinced he was close to uncovering the truth behind the hauntings. One stormy night, Carver decided to hold a séance in the house, hoping to communicate with whatever spirits might be present. He gathered a few local historians and paranormal experts to assist him. The séance was conducted in the basement, the room where the mirror had been found. As the ritual progressed, the atmosphere grew heavier. The temperature dropped significantly, and the candle flames flickered wildly. Suddenly, the mirror began to vibrate, and a spectral form began to materialize in front of them. A translucent figure of a woman in Victorian attire, her face etched with anguish. The apparition spoke in a mournful voice. "I am bound here by my grief and my guilt. I tried to warn them, but they did not listen. Now, I am left to wander these halls, forever seeking solace." The séance ended abruptly as the house was engulfed in a cacophony of crashing noises and howling winds. The participants fled, leaving Carver alone with the ghostly presence. He felt an overwhelming sense of dread and regret, realizing that the spirits of the Blackwell house were indeed trapped, their suffering perpetuated by the house's dark history. Carver ultimately decided to abandon the project. He left the house as it was, a somber monument to its tragic past. The Blackwell house remained empty, its eerie presence a chilling reminder of the unresolved mysteries and restless spirits that still lingered within its walls. To this day, the Blackwell house stands as a ghostly relic, a place where shadows whisper and sorrow echoes through the decaying rooms. Those who dare to approach speak of an oppressive atmosphere and fleeting glimpses of the forlorn spirits that never found peace. After Jonathan Carver's dramatic departure, the Blackwell house remained a symbol of mystery and dread. The stories surrounding it grew more elaborate with each passing year, drawing paranormal enthusiasts and thrill-seekers who were eager to experience its chilling reputation firsthand. In the early 1990s, the house caught the attention of a young historian named Emily Hayes. Emily had been studying the local folklore and was fascinated by the Blackwell house's dark history. Determined to uncover the truth, she began her own investigation. Unlike the previous occupants and visitors, Emily was driven by a genuine desire to understand the house's past, rather than simply experiencing its supernatural phenomena. Emily's research led her to old archives and interviews with locals who had once lived near the Blackwell house. Through her investigation, she uncovered a series of old letters and documents related to the Blackwell family. One letter, written by Mrs. Blackwell, was particularly revealing. In it, Mrs. Blackwell described a series of disturbing visions she had experienced in the house, including a recurring dream of a dark figure that seemed to be following her. As Emily delved deeper, she discovered that the Blackwell house had once been a center of local community events, including spiritual gatherings led by Mrs. Blackwell. These events were initially intended to help grieving families, but they took a darker turn as Mrs. Blackwell became more obsessed with communicating with the deceased. Emily decided to spend a night in the Blackwell house, hoping that a close examination of the property might reveal more about its haunting. She set up her equipment in the old library, a room filled with dusty books and forgotten relics. The library, with its tall shelves and dim lighting, had always been the most unsettling room in the house. As the night progressed, Emily noted a growing sense of unease. The temperature in the library dropped noticeably, and her flashlight flickered intermittently. Despite her skepticism, she felt a presence in the room, a weight in the air that seemed to press against her. At around midnight, Emily began to hear soft, sorrowful music. It was a haunting melody, like a piano being played somewhere in the distance. She followed the sound to the basement, where the old mirror had once been. The music grew louder, and she felt an icy breath on her neck. Her breath misted in the air as she descended into the basement, the source of the music unclear. There, she saw the mirror, now covered with a thin layer of dust. It seemed to be reflecting not just the room but a series of ghostly images. Figures from the past, people in Victorian attire, including Mrs. Blackwell, appeared in the glass. They were frozen in expressions of despair and confusion. Suddenly, the basement lights flickered out, plunging Emily into darkness. She heard the whispers again, louder and more urgent than before. They spoke of lost souls, unresolved conflicts, and an unending cycle of grief. Emily tried to calm her racing heart as she reached for her flashlight, but before she could turn it on, she felt a cold, invisible hand grip her arm. In the pitch-black basement, she saw a faint, glowing figure of Mrs. Blackwell. The ghostly apparition seemed to be reaching out to Emily, her eyes filled with an imploring sadness. Emily, terrified but resolute, asked the spirit what it wanted. The apparition's voice was a mere whisper, barely audible. "Help us break free from this torment. The house binds us with its darkness. We cannot leave." Determined to uncover the truth and help the trapped souls, Emily began to investigate the house's architectural secrets. She found hidden compartments and secret passages that seemed to have been built to hide something, possibly to conceal the activities and artifacts of Mrs. Blackwell's spiritual sessions. Among these hidden spaces, Emily discovered a small, concealed room containing a worn book of rituals and a collection of old, faded photographs of the Blackwell family. One photograph depicted a large, elaborate séance held in the house. In the background, a shadowy figure loomed, obscured by darkness. Emily realized that the house itself had become a vessel for the spiritual energies summoned by Mrs. Blackwell. The architecture, with its maze-like design, was not just a result of eccentricity but a deliberate attempt to trap and contain these energies. To help the spirits move on, Emily consulted with experts in spiritual cleansing and exorcism. They performed a ritual to purify the house, using the book of rituals and the knowledge Emily had gathered. The process was intense and emotional, with powerful manifestations occurring as the spirits resisted leaving their earthly confines. By the end of the ritual, the atmosphere in the Blackwell house shifted. The oppressive weight lifted, and the strange noises and cold spots gradually ceased. The mirror, once a focal point of the haunting, was removed and carefully restored, with the intention of displaying it in a museum as a historical artifact rather than a cursed object. Emily left the Blackwell house feeling a sense of closure. Though the house was no longer a place of fear, it remained a powerful symbol of the enduring connection between the past and the present. The Blackwell house was eventually sold and restored as a historical site, with a respectful acknowledgement of its haunted legacy. the story of the Blackwell House became a tale of redemption and understanding. It served as a reminder that sometimes, the ghosts of the past can be appeased with empathy and effort, allowing both the living and the dead to find a measure of peace. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. With the completion of the spiritual cleansing, the Blackwell House began its new chapter as a restored historical site. The once dreaded mansion now served as a testament to the intricate history of the Blackwell family and their troubled legacy. Despite the significant renovations and the removal of the cursed mirror, the house retained an air of somber elegance that attracted history enthusiasts and curious visitors alike. In the late 1990s, the Blackwell House reopened to the public with Emily Hayes leading guided tours. Her detailed knowledge of the house's history and its haunting past made her an exceptional guide. The tours were designed to educate visitors about the Blackwell family's contributions to the community and the strange series of events that led to the house's infamy. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun set behind the mansion's grand facade, Emily prepared for a special evening tour. It was a private event for a group of historians and paranormal investigators who were interested in learning more about the house's complex past. As Emily set up for the evening, she noticed that the atmosphere in the house felt different, lighter, yet tinged with a faint, lingering melancholy. The group arrived, and the tour began with Emily leading them through the house's beautifully restored rooms. She spoke of the Blackwell family's history, the tragic events, and the extensive renovations. As they reached the library, Emily shared the story of the mirror and the spiritual disturbances that had once plagued the house. During the tour, one of the historians, Dr. Samuel Blackwood, a renowned expert in Victorian spiritualism, expressed a particular interest in the old rituals performed by Mrs. Blackwell. He requested permission to examine some of the artifacts and documents that had been recovered from the house. Emily agreed, and Dr. Blackwood spent hours carefully analyzing the materials. He discovered additional layers of Mrs. Blackwell's spiritual practices that had not been fully understood before. The rituals, it seemed, were not just about contacting the dead but also about protecting oneself from malevolent forces. Mrs. Blackwell had unknowingly summoned entities that had become trapped in the house, unable to leave due to the incomplete nature of her protection rituals. Dr. Blackwood's findings were both fascinating and troubling. He theorized that Mrs. Blackwell's attempts to communicate with her deceased loved ones had created a spiritual maelstrom, drawing in other restless spirits and amplifying the house's haunting presence. One evening, as the tour concluded, a young visitor named Lily, who had shown a keen interest in the history of the house, approached Emily. Lily had a personal connection to the Blackwell house. Her great-grandmother had lived nearby and shared stories about the mansion's mysterious past. Lily was particularly intrigued by the idea of the spirits still lingering in the house. Emily and Lily decided to explore the attic together, a place that had remained mostly untouched during the restoration. As they ventured up the creaky staircase, they felt a noticeable shift in the air. The attic, with its slanted roof and dusty remnants, seemed to hold a quiet, almost reverent atmosphere. In the corner of the attic, behind a stack of old trunks, they found a small, hidden compartment. Inside was a box filled with personal items belonging to Mrs. Blackwell, a collection of letters, photographs, and a small journal. Among these items was a letter addressed to the spirits she had attempted to communicate with, written in a sorrowful, apologetic tone. The letter revealed that Mrs. Blackwell had been tormented by guilt and regret. She had feared that her attempts to contact her deceased husband and child had inadvertently caused harm to other restless souls. She expressed her hope that one day someone would come to understand her plight and help set things right. Lily and Emily carefully examined the journal, which contained additional notes and sketches of rituals. They realized that Mrs. Blackwell's intentions had been genuine, though her methods had been flawed. Her final entries were hopeful, wishing for redemption and peace for both herself and the spirits she had unintentionally bound to the house. Moved by the discovery, Emily and Lily decided to organize a memorial event to honor Mrs. Blackwell's memory and acknowledge the unresolved suffering of the spirits. The event was held in the grand hall of the mansion, where attendees gathered to hear the story of Mrs. Blackwell and the Blackwell house. During the event, a sense of tranquility enveloped the house. visitors felt a renewed respect for the mansion's history and its haunted past. The memorial included a symbolic gesture of release, placing a new, inscribed plaque in the library, dedicating it to the memory of the Blackwell family and all those who had been affected by their story. As the years went by, the Blackwell House continued to be a place of reflection and remembrance. While it no longer hosted paranormal activity, it retained its aura of mystery and respect. The house became a symbol of understanding and reconciliation, showing that even the darkest pasts could find a measure of peace and redemption. Emily Hayes moved on to other historical projects, but the Blackwell House remained a part of her heart. The mansion stood as a reminder of the complexities of human experience, the echoes of the past, and the enduring quest for resolution. And so, the Blackwell House, with its storied history and its enduring legacy, continued to stand at the edge of the forest, a monument to the entwined destinies of the living and the dead, a place where shadows of the past had finally found their place in the light. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.